Continuing with how the muscles work, today we're going to talk about why your muscles get tired, why you might have sore muscles, things that affect that. So oxygen supply and cellular respiration. Your muscles have cells, so there's muscle cells. Cellular respiration, here again, biology class, you should have had some of this. The early phase, or the first step in cellular respiration, is glycolysis. Glycolysis is the breakdown of glucose. It happens in the cytoplasm. It yields a little bit of ATP, not a large amount. So when muscle has a high requirement for oxygen, because oxygen is needed to continue cellular respiration. And when oxygen is present, that glucose can be completely broken down. Excuse me. If oxygen is not present, the glucose won't make it to the mitochondria, and then you're not going to get as much ATP, not as much energy. Hemoglobin in your red blood cells is the main carrier for oxygen in your body. So when the oxygen leaves your lungs, it's picked up by your red blood cells, and hemoglobin is what carries the oxygen. Myoglobin then stores oxygen in the muscle tissue. So hemoglobin carries it, myoglobin stores oxygen. So what happens when you're resting, when you're taking notes, when you're in class, rest or moderate activity, you have enough oxygen for cellular respiration to take place completely. However, when you exercise, when you're running, strenuous exercise, you develop oxygen deficiency or an oxygen debt. How do you tell when you have oxygen debt? You breathe hard. You start breathing heavily. So what happens, pyruvic acid forms during cellular respiration, and then it will form lactic acid if you don't have enough oxygen, and that's going to accumulate, and that lactic acid builds up in your muscles, and that's what gives you sore muscles. So when your muscles are sore, you're not getting enough oxygen to them. So lactic acid is a product of anaerobic, not enough oxygen, respiration in the form of lactate. So lactic acid causes sore muscles because those cells are not getting enough oxygen. Then lactate is going to diffuse out of your muscle cells, and it goes to your liver. And your liver is what converts that lactate back to glucose or gets rid of that lactic acid. So in order for your cells, your muscle tissue, to become not sore anymore, that lactic acid has to be broken down through your liver. Oxygen debt then is the amount of oxygen that the liver needs to convert that lactic acid or lactate back into glucose. So that's the actual amount, plus the amount that muscle cells need to make more ATP and reestablish their original concentrations. So oxygen debt is what my body is missing, or I need to repay to get back to my original concentration. Repaying that oxygen debt can take several hours, especially if it's very strenuous activity. Physical training helps to increase muscles' capacity to improve energy production, which is why first day of basketball season you run and you are stiff and sore because those muscles have not been in training for the type of movements that you're going to be doing. So when you exercise consistently, your muscles actually become more capable of performing without as much oxygen, which is why when you're in shape, you don't get sore as quickly as if you're out of shape. Here's just a quick review of cellular respiration. So the first step, this would be glycolysis. This takes place in the cytoplasm. This does not need oxygen. So whether you have enough oxygen or not, I'm going to produce a little bit of ATP. Glycolysis occurs here. However, the main part of cellular respiration that produces the most ATP takes place in those mitochondria, and oxygen is needed for that to take place. So here you can kind of see types of exercise, low to moderate, blood flow. You don't need as much, or you have enough oxygen. High intensity, your oxygen supply is typically not sufficient. Or if you think of a sprinter, if you have a good track coach and you're a sprinter, they're going to tell you to breathe properly, don't hold your breath when you're running, because then at the end of the race you're trying to make up for what you've done. So if it's low activity, glycolysis is going to be the first step. ATP, I have oxygen present, so it's going to go to my mitochondria. Carbon dioxide is exhaled fairly easily. High intensity for a long period of time, glycolysis will still happen, but then it doesn't go to this pathway. It doesn't make it to the mitochondria. So I don't get as much ATP. Instead, I continue to build lactic acid, and I will get sore muscles and an oxygen debt. So related to oxygen debt, your muscles also will tire. If you have, even like a baby, when you hold a 6-pound baby and you think, oh, what a tiny little thing, after you hold it for a while, your arms are tired. So that would be an example of muscle fatigue. When a muscle loses its ability to contract, it's referred to as fatigue. So they get tired. Muscle fatigue usually develops from electrolyte imbalances. Remember that sodium-calcium balance as it goes back and forth. Lactic acid in this portion is not. Scientists don't know if lactic acid really has a role in this part. Muscle cramp, if you've actually ever had your muscle cramp, usually occurs because there's not enough ATP needed for those electrolytes to go back to their original concentration, so your muscle fibers can't relax. They don't get to the stage where they can relax. So you need energy for your muscles to contract, but there's also some energy needed for your muscle to go back to the relaxed state. So when you have a muscle cramp, your muscles aren't getting the energy they need to relax. Your muscle has become fatigued, and there's not enough ATP there. Cramps, they talk a lot about eating bananas, potassium. I think that is another electrolyte that's involved. Potassium, potatoes are actually high in potassium. Contraction of your muscles is huge in your body temperature, which is why when you exercise you get so hot. Your muscles produce a large amount of heat when they're being used, which is why when you get goosebumps, even though they're tiny little muscles, when you get goosebumps, that generates a fair amount of heat for your body. So a lot of the energy that is produced in cellular respiration